Now that we know what React actually is, it's time to get our hands dirty. And for that, I visit codepen.io. That is like a web editor, which allows us to write very simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript apps, or really more like a playground. We won't really use that to build real projects. In this course, we will use a local setup for that. But it is great to dive into React. So on codepen.io, you can click on create and create a so-called pen. That is simply a workspace where you can write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Now in this editor, you got three areas for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And now let's write a very simple application, a demo, to see how we write something with normal HTML, JavaScript, and so on, and how we then add React to maybe have an easier time creating such an application. For that, in the HTML part of this editor, I'll create a new div. And you can quickly create this by typing div and hitting tab. This will automatically expand this. And in there, I will now add a h1 tag and simply output max, my name, and below that a paragraph where I say your age 28. This is my age. And of course, feel free to use your data here. So this now leads to the output below. It updates automatically. Now let's quickly give this some styling. Let's simply give this div maybe a class of, let's say, person. The name is up to you. And add this person CSS class with some normal CSS code where I simply give this, let's say, a border, 1 pixel solid, and this gray with CCC, and a box shadow of 0, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and let's say the same gray. Let's maybe use a slightly brighter one here, EEE, for the border. Let's now also give this a width of, let's say, 200 pixels and a padding of 20 pixels. And now we have this card-like look you see below there. Now that is such a person card, holding information about a person, let's say. We can also set this to display inline block and give it a margin of 10 pixels, because now what I can do is I can of course replicate this and add a second person, let's say Manu, who has an age of 29. That's my colleague. So now we got these two person cards, and you could easily think of this as a normal web application where you output some information about users or about the team behind your blog you're creating, something like that. And we're using only HTML and CSS here. Now we can already see one limitation kind of. We're always reusing the same HTML code here. Now that isn't too problematic here. It would be more problematic if we would do something with each of these snippets with JavaScript even. But even without that, we can think of this part here as a component. This person div always is structured in the same way, just the data inside of it varies. This is where React comes in, though React shines the most as we connect this to JavaScript logic too. But still, we can already use React to create reusable components here. For that, let's add React. I'm going to shrink this CSS part a tiny bit, and in the JavaScript area, I first of all have to import React. You can click on that gear icon next to JavaScript, and then you can download or import some external JavaScript libraries. And React is such an external library. Actually, it's so popular that on CodePen, you can go to the Quick Add dropdown and simply scroll to React. And this will add it. Now here it adds version 15.6.1, might differ at the point of time you're viewing this. In this course, I will cover version 16, so you're learning the latest React, and in the local setup we'll use in this course, we'll also use that latest React version, no worries. Here, however, we're using an older one, but for the demo here, this does not matter at all. We also need to quick add React DOM. That is another package from the React team. React itself kind of is the logic we need for creating these React components. I told you that React is all about components. React DOM is then about rendering these components to the real DOM. With these two packages added, we're almost there, but React uses a special JavaScript syntax and a lot of next generation JavaScript features. I'll come back to this later in the course. I'll have a whole module where I introduce you to the most important next-gen features React uses. So to unlock the usage of these features and this special syntax, in the JavaScript preprocessor dropdown, you have to choose Babel. That simply is a tool which compiles the next generation JavaScript code you're writing here to code that runs fine in the browser, so that we write code with all features we want, but ship code that works in the browser. And with that, you can click Save and Close. And now we can start writing our React app here in the JavaScript section. So why don't we do that? Let's create a React component so that we have a reusable custom HTML element we can use instead of repeating this HTML code here on the left. In its most basic form, and you're going to learn about a different form in this course too, in its most basic form, a React component is just a function. So we can create a new function and maybe name this person. Make sure it starts with a capital P. This is required to use it correctly with React. This person component is a normal function, but it has to return the code you actually want to render to the DOM. And here React uses a special syntax which is called JSX. I'm using parentheses here to be able to write or to return some multi-line code. And now I'm going to copy the code here from the left and paste it into my return statement here. And this certainly looks strange now. It looks like HTML in JavaScript, which wouldn't work normally. And it wouldn't if we hadn't added Babel here as a preprocessor. Babel, if configured correctly, which it automatically is here, allows us to use this special syntax which looks like HTML, but which isn't. And I will dive deeper into that syntax in the next course modules. It's called JSX, and it's just syntactical sugar. Behind the scenes, this gets compiled to normal JavaScript code. We can use it here though to have an easier time writing what we actually want to render. Fine, so now we got that function, and I said that this is a React component. But of course, right now it's just a function. To turn this into a React component, we actually have to use React to render it to the screen. So I'll get rid of my person here on the left, and instead I'll add a new div here, and I'll give it an ID of, let's say, P1. You can choose any ID you want though. Now, the React package we imported is responsible for correctly parsing this code here, this JSX code. The other package we imported was React DOM, if you remember. You can always check here on the gear icon, React DOM. This actually exposes an object, React DOM, written like that, with DOM all being capital characters, which has a render method. This method allows us to render a JavaScript function as a component to the real DOM. And that treated as a component part is exactly what React takes care about. We can then render this function, but not by referencing it like this, but by actually turning it into a HTML element. Again, behind the scenes using this JSX syntax, which is understood by React. So I write this as my custom self-closing HTML element, and render then takes another argument where I specify where to render this. And there I reach out to the document, and I can use the query selector, so normal JavaScript code, to select any element with the ID P1. And that again is normal JavaScript code, the normal query selector. With that, I'm telling React that I want to render this function, the person component, in this place here on the left. And it does. Now the styling is lost because class actually is a keyword in JavaScript, so React turns this into class name. And that's the best proof that this looks like HTML but isn't. It uses a custom syntax which in 99% of the cases is like HTML, but behind the scenes it's transformed to JavaScript. And now you see we have our person class here again, Max, treated as a custom component, which we can also verify by the fact that our inline block styling here is kind of ignored because we're wrapping this in a custom element which is treated as a block statement. Now I'll dive into styling in this course. For now, let's just be happy that we got our component rendered here. It's not really reusable though. If I had a second hook in my HTML file here, in my HTML part, let's say with ID P2, and I wanted to render a different component, a different person, I would have to hard code the values into that and actually create a new component. The great thing about React and why components are so awesome and save us a lot of time is that we can configure them dynamically as we need them. So here what I'll do is I'll actually add an argument to this person function, which I'll name props. You can choose any name you want, but the concept I'm using here is called props. React automatically gives me an argument in that function I turned into a component with this syntax down here with the person JSX code. And prop simply contains all the attributes I add to my own component. So I could add name max and age, let's say 28, like this. And if I do this, now we can output this in our person component. We just need to dynamically access this props element, this props argument. We output dynamic content in React with curly braces, opening and closing, and only one pair, no double curly braces, only one pair of curly braces. And there we reach out to props and then .name to get this name attribute I passed, and props age to output that age property I passed, so props age. And now we're using the properties, the attributes we're passing to our own component. And that's pretty cool because now if we repeat this React DOM render call here for P2, so make sure to exchange this in the second query selector, we can pass different props to that component, like menu and 29, and now both components use the same base, as you can see. They use the same function which is turned into a component by React, but we're really taking advantage of the component concept because we only wrote the HTML code once and now we can reuse it over and over again. And I bet you can see the potential of this. In very big applications, you can compose the entire application of reusable pieces. And this component isn't even using any logic. It doesn't listen to clicks or stuff like that. In apps such as the app we build in this course, we will of course do that. We will append our own logic to our components. And then we have small, reusable, maintainable, and easy to manage pieces with their own logic contained in them, which we can use anywhere to build amazing applications. That's the idea behind React, and that is why it's so great and why this component concept is so great. Now let me do one more thing though. Right now I'm calling React DOM render twice. There's nothing wrong with that. But actually, we can also do this a bit differently. We could have one div here in the HTML part, which has an ID of app or root. Doesn't matter, any ID of your choice. Now I'll get rid of the second React DOM render call, and I will add a variable here. This variable, I'll name app, but this name is also up to you. But this variable also will hold some JSX code. And I'm just wrapping this in parentheses so that I can write this code over multiple lines. Now here, what I can do is, I can now output my person component as I did before. We have to wrap it with a div though, because JSX has the requirement of only having one root element, so adjacent elements are not allowed. I will also talk about this in the course though. There are ways around this limitation. So now I added two person component usages to my app variable here. And now I simply mount the app variable in the place of this element with the ID app, which I select by adjusting my query selector. And now you see I got the two elements now next to each other because now they're rendered in the same hook, in the same element, so to say, in the same div. And this method of only having one hook, one React DOM render call, and then creating an app there with nested components is the far more popular way of creating React apps. It is the way I will use in this course, and in the next lectures I will talk about this versus the alternative with multiple React DOM render calls. But be aware, this is the way you'll see far more often. With this approach, you create so-called single-page applications. Now, this is our first React app. Now let's dive deeper into React and let's continue with the course and really get started with React.